If you examine the current dynamics between Washington and Ottawa, it no longer resembles diplomacy or a typical neighborly disagreement. It appears more like a deliberate dismantling of 7 decades of North American leadership, not through weapons or troops, but via phone conversations, travel arrangements, and formal agreements that excluded Washington from the process. For generations, the United States and Canada maintained the world's most intertwined economy, two countries functioning as a single, smooth, highly effective system, almost unnoticeable in its integration. Yet this week, Canada took decisive action and began redrafting the framework. The White House remained unaware until everything was already finalized. Donald Trump dismissed Canada's military involvement as mere symbolic awards. He cast doubt on the significance of the 457 Canadian lives lost in joint missions. He approached America's nearest partner as if it were an opponent, expecting Ottawa to back down immediately. Mark Carney's reply came not through media appearances or social media posts, it came through careful planning. As Trump stirred crowds with his criticisms, Carney engaged in secure discussions with leaders in Brussels, Munich, and Tokyo. In just the last 72 hours, what Canada formalized, publicized, and put into motion will alter the structure of the Western world for years to come. Ripples are already spreading across defense industries, energy talks, and diplomatic networks. Meanwhile, much of the press focuses on the personal barbs rather than the underlying realignment. Over the coming minutes, I'll outline precisely what occurred, the reasons Washington missed the signs, and how the reality you inhabit now differs profoundly from the one that existed just 7 days ago. But pause for a moment. Imagine your most dependable trading partner repeatedly damaging your reputation, warning of contract cancellations, and belittling your efforts. How soon would you discreetly cultivate ties with their rivals? Keep that idea in mind, because that's precisely the step Canada has taken. And they didn't merely hint at it, they carried it out. Share your view below. Is Canada safeguarding its interests? Or is this a risky move that might fracture the broader Western coalition? Let's step back to see the origins. This situation didn't emerge recently. It traces back to Davos in late January 2026. Trump addressed world figures and labeled Canada's military efforts as participation trophies. He challenged the worth of collective sacrifices dating to World War I. He dealt with the country possessing the planet's longest undefended border as though it were a burdensome renter. The slight went beyond campaign language. It represented a serious error in judgment, since the recipient wasn't an ordinary office holder prone to summoning reporters for a heated rebuke. Carney, a past central bank leader who guided the Bank of England during the 2008 meltdown, avoids theatrical anger. He focuses on preparation. The instant Trump issued that jab, Carney triggered pre-planned measures developed quietly from his first days in power. Here are the key developments from the past 72 hours. 3 distinct actions, each backed by evidence, and everyone struck Washington with unique force. First development, the Eurogroup. On February 16th, Canada's Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, joined a Eurogroup working dinner in Brussels. Consider this carefully. The Eurogroup gathers finance ministers from Eurozone nations, forming the core of European financial coordination. Canada belongs neither to the Eurozone nor the EU. No finance minister from outside Europe had previously received an invitation to participate as a strategic ally until this occasion. Eurogroup President Kyriakos Pierrakakis personally issued the invite. The stated aim involved forging shared pledges on economic security and worldwide financial resilience. Yet the subtext is clear. In today's diplomatic terms, economic security signals one priority: finding ways to lessen reliance on an unreliable partner. Europe observed instability in Washington. In Ottawa, it saw a stable G7 nation with strong legal systems, trade pacts, and a finance minister fluent in their discourse. Within an hour and a half of the Eurogroup discussion beginning, currency exchanges reacted. The message landed. Washington sat absent from the table. That absence spoke volumes. Second development, the SAFE program. On February 15th, during the Munich Security Conference, Canada's Defense Minister, David McGuinty, committed to the European Union's €150 billion Security Action for Europe initiative. This represents the EU's primary effort to bolster defense capabilities. The program aims explicitly to decrease Europe's reliance on U.S. defense supply networks. Canada has become the first non-European nation ever to participate. Canadian defense firms can now collaborate with European counterparts on shared initiatives and gain access to advantageous funding totaling hundreds of millions of euros. Reflect on the implications. Canada, America's most intimate military partner, co-manager of NORAD, sharer of intelligence, has entered a defense framework deliberately crafted to diminish dependence on the United States. The commitment builds on the security and defense partnership Carney established with the EU in Brussels last June. He laid this foundation over months, while Washington fixated on symbolic awards. Carney constructed an alternative pathway as Trump nurtured grievances. That's the contrast between short-term maneuvers and long-range vision. Third development, Munich. Canada also inked a military-industrial agreement with Denmark and a joint statement with Germany concerning artificial intelligence and technological independence. A statement on AI independence with Germany, finalized in Munich without U.S. involvement. If that registers with you, you already sense the unease rippling through Washington. The entity defining standards for artificial intelligence and digital commerce will shape the framework of the coming industrial era. Canada and Germany have begun co-authoring those standards. Carney planned to personally supervise all these signings and hold meetings with leaders from Greenland, Denmark, Ukraine, Germany, Spain, Finland, Norway, and the EU, plus a group of American senators, until a devastating mass shooting in British Columbia compelled his return home. He set aside his own landmark diplomatic schedule to address domestic tragedy. That reflects a leader who prioritizes citizens over appearances. The agreements proceeded regardless, and the international community noticed. Why is this unfolding at this moment? Trump's approach contains a critical weakness he has failed to grasp. His method depends on division. He requires each party to feel isolated. He informed Canada, "You're isolated facing the American economy." He told Europe, "You're isolated against Russia." He told Australia, "You're isolated against China." When he applies excessive pressure, those separate parties cease focusing on him and turn toward one another. Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel. Carney reached out to Brussels. Trump doubted NATO obligations. Europe advanced safe. Trump floated annexing Greenland. Denmark aligned with Ottawa. Each aggressive swing yields not compliance, but division. He is unintentionally creating the very alliance he most dreaded, a web of democracies that have accounted for his volatility and chosen progress regardless. One Canadian defense analyst described Carney's Davos remarks as an invitation for mid-tier nations to abandon appeasing an aggressor and chart their independent course. That invitation is receiving active responses. If this analysis links elements you haven't encountered combined elsewhere, you're already more informed than most observers of this unfolding event. Yet the most significant developments remain forthcoming. The submarine choice, the fighter jet reassessment, and the critical minerals strategy that might irreversibly redirect resource influence away from Washington. Subscribe immediately. Events are progressing too rapidly for any one source to cover fully, and you'll want updates as the next phase emerges. Now, consider the individual steering this effort, because Carney's actions merit clear recognition. Most heads of government, when targeted by a U.S. president, adopt a protective stance. They rally national pride, deliver fiery addresses, project strength domestically. Carney avoided all of that. He turned to execution. He grasps a core truth of contemporary influence. Power no longer hinges on possessing the largest naval fleets. It rests on dominating essential resources, establishing trade regulations, and developing systems others rely upon. While Trump fixates on tariffs, an outdated economic tool, Carney constructs a modern interconnected system. He formalized a defense link with the EU. He entered the SAFE program. He dispatched his finance minister to the Eurogroup. He concluded an AI statement with Germany. He has Canada pursuing liquefied natural gas sales to Europe and Asia via Pacific facilities. He is evaluating the multi-billion-dollar F-35 contract benefiting American defense firms. He is conducting open competitions between a German submarine builder and a South Korean company for Canada's upcoming submarine fleet. Every step broadcasts a fact Washington cannot overlook. Canada possesses alternatives and is actively pursuing them. You counter a bully not by mirroring his hostility, but by rendering him peripheral. Carney isn't confronting Trump directly. He's circumventing him. This aspect should alarm Washington most deeply. The Canada-EU Security and Defense Partnership, formalized in June 2025, which provided the legal basis for this week's Munich agreements, transcends a simple paper. It forms the framework for an alternate Western system, one encompassing Canada, the EU, Germany, Denmark, possibly the UK, cooperating on defense acquisitions, AI guidelines, digital commerce, and critical minerals, independent of Washington oversight. Canada holds enormous supplies of lithium, cobalt, uranium, and rare earths, the components essential for electric vehicles, missiles, and future infrastructure. Through strengthened European ties, Carney signals to global markets: if you seek the foundational materials for tomorrow, approach this group, and Washington no longer dictates terms. What does this imply for you, regardless of your location? If you're in the United States, this reconfiguration carries tangible consequences that will affect everyday life. Defense projects formerly awarded to U.S. companies now face competition from European and Asian bidders. Multi-billion-dollar fighter jet deals, even larger submarine contracts. Canada is scrutinizing all of them. Supply networks premised on effortless Canada-U.S. linkage are undergoing rigorous evaluation. The longer tensions persist, the more entrenched these new pathways become. Once businesses adapt supply chains to fresh partners, they rarely revert when politics soften. Employment, agreements, economic benefits, they migrate along the revised paths and stay there. If your career involves defense production, energy, or technology, these aren't distant international shifts. They represent fundamental market transformations impacting your income. Here's the stark reality Washington must confront. Carney never intended to dedicate his initial year as prime minister to overhauling Canada's strategic alignments. He aimed to lead the nation normally, but Trump's antagonism, tariffs, disparagements, threats, forced his hand. What renders Carney particularly formidable as an opponent is his detachment. He pursues this not from ego or resentment, but because calculations require it. When an ex-central banker concludes that numbers necessitate major repositioning, he executes thoroughly and durably. 3 potential futures now exist, none restoring the status quo of 3 weeks past. The likeliest outcome: U.S. business interests eventually yield. Defense firms losing Canadian submarine and fighter jet business to European and Korean rivals will lobby Washington intensely. Energy firms seeing Canadian LNG diverted to Asian destinations rather than U.S. facilities will tally their setbacks. Republican leaders in border regions witnessing silent supply chain shifts will raise concerns. Trump, encountering economic pressure in key states, consents to a summit that preserves appearances. Carney, ever practical, provides an exit, yet the European and Munich ties endure. Canada has broadened its options, and that broadening persists. Ties adjust, but never revert fully. The second path, the chain reaction. Canada's achievements at the Eurogroup and Munich encourage other mid-sized nations to accelerate. Australia, already preparing to host Carney for a parliamentary speech in March, intensifies collaboration. The UK, observing Canada's safe and Eurogroup access, hastens its own defense reconnection with Europe. Japan and South Korea, vying for Canada's submarine contracts, expand resource and tech links across the Pacific. The structure Carney fosters gains momentum. Each addition reinforces the entire network. Washington discovers itself still the dominant individual economy, yet no longer the central pivot of the Western system. The third path, intensification. Trump counters the safe commitment. He warns of ending Five Eyes intelligence cooperation. He urges NATO members to select between Washington and the Canada-EU structure. This remains the outcome few voice openly, as acknowledging it increases its plausibility. Yet following Greenland annexation hints, Canada labeled a security risk, and NATO doubts aired publicly, conventional boundaries vanished long ago. One certainty stands: the US-Canada bond will never resemble its former self. Even if Trump departs office tomorrow, even if his replacement contacts Carney immediately, the takeaway endures. Canada refuses to concentrate all strategic assets in one place. Canada has choices. Canada is pursuing them. Once a nation establishes those substitute connections, complete with legal structures, defense pacts, and Eurogroup access, they outlast political shifts. They evolve into the standard. Carney didn't initiate this conflict. He preferred avoiding it. Yet he demonstrates exceptional skill in navigating it, not through belligerence, but through patience, accuracy, and a perspective spanning years that Trump cannot match. Trump focuses on the upcoming event. Carney targets the coming decade. And currently, that decade takes shape in Brussels, Munich, Canberra, anywhere but Washington. The question demanding reflection is this: did Mark Carney erode American strategic primacy over the Western alliance, or did Donald Trump accomplish that himself, leaving Carney to gather the fragments and construct an alternative? Share your perspective in the comments. I review them all. And subscribe, because the upcoming developments, the submarine selection, the F-35 evaluation, the LNG shift toward Asia, are approaching swiftly. This narrative continues accelerating. Stay engaged. This material offers commentary and perspective for informational use only. It does not provide financial, legal, or geopolitical guidance.